Hi, hi everyone. Welcome to our webinar. Just to explain our taskbar quickly, there's a red arrow you can use to minimize it, and you can click it again to pull it out again. There's a section that says questions in your taskbar. Any questions you have, type them in there and submit. And then at the end of the webinar, we'll answer all of your questions for you.
Well, thank you, Emily, for being the master of ceremonies and helping us move along, keep on time. And welcome, everyone. I want to provide just a warm welcome for you all to joining the second session of our identifying stop-out points in the enrollment funnel. These are many challenges that all our institutions are facing, and throughout this series, we're going to hear from some renowned experts, thought leaders, experienced practitioners who can really help us gain insights that you can apply at your own institution. And I think one of the challenges that we're all facing is many times we're in positions and we often have to discover how do we solve these significant problems for our institutions, such as re-enrolling our stop-outs. And this is something, my name is Jerry Hanley, and for almost 20 years, I was the Assistant Vice Chancellor for Academic Technology Services at California State University. And I was also responsible for Cal State Online and was given a task of how do I reconnect our students who stopped out, and how do I recruit them, re-enroll them, retain them, and help them graduate. And these were things that I often, I wasn't prepared for, and being able to learn from other people is an essential process. Because also for our institution, I'm sure many of you are having challenges with the retention of your own students and they're stopping out due to COVID. Having these strategies are going to be very helpful. And I know the speaker today, we're going to hear from the wonderful Katie Dawson. I would have loved to have Katie and listen to her on her advice when I got started in dealing with our Reconnect program. So I think today you're going to hear wonderful information that can help you in what you're doing at your own institution. And what I'd like to do now is pass it over to the co-sponsor, the facilitator, and the contributor of wonderful advice too as well. And that's JT Allen, the CEO of myFootpath. And JT has a lot of experience that he's going to bring to the table and share with you as well today. So JT, I'll pass it over to you.
Thanks, Jerry. Well, good to be with everyone today, and also very excited for our speaker. If you turn to the next slide, I think it will sort of set the context for what we do. And our company is really focused on stop-outs, helping universities bring stop-outs back and really driving significant enrollments. That's a number, 40 million, that isn't going down. In fact, it keeps increasing. And this is year 23 for me in the business, and this number's never been higher. And so our focus and our work is really on helping universities to bring these stop-outs back. And if you turn to the next page, I mean, here's just a minor example of the potential, right? This is a sample regional public university. All told, stop-outs started with probably 250,000, grew to over time to about 400,000. And the green number represents actual students. And by the time it's all done, we think it'll be as high as 4,500 in the campaign to bring those folks back. So just to put it in context, this can be real students, real numbers that make a difference for universities. If you turn to the next slide, in terms of myFootpath and what we do, our focus is on bringing students back, but our competitive advantage is really in using data to apply effort. So what do we mean by that? Re-engagement is the kind of thing that you can work to eternity on it and you'll never be done. And so the key is, how do you do it? How do you do it efficiently and effectively to drive your results? So certainly there's research, there's support systems, all designed to help re-enroll and graduate students. Those are a part of it, but it's the data that allows us to focus in. And so I'm excited today to talk about how some of the data is used. A practitioner in the field here is going to share some insights. So if you turn to the next page, I'll pass it back to Jerry to introduce our speaker today.
Thank you, JT. And it's really my pleasure and honor to introduce Dr. Katie Dawson, the Assistant Vice President for Academic Innovation and Learning for the University of Louisiana System. And I have to say, Katie brings tremendous experience, and she's worked, if you're on a campus, she's worked on a campus in Louisiana, and now she's working at the state level system. And I think the insights that she's going to bring about how to enable the re-enrollment and to the support of bringing back your students who've stopped out for lots of reasons, and showing what you can do to bring them back and have them be successful and contributing to your state, I think is very important. Katie has some insights that can apply to what you're doing. She brings passion and innovation. She understands student support systems. And I think one of the things that JT has pointed out, the data that you have about these students can be essential to help you plan how to bring your students back, from recruiting them back, re-enrolling, retaining them, and helping them graduate. So Katie, I'm going to pass it over to you and take it away. And I'm sure everyone is going to really benefit from the insights that you're going to bring to us.
Great. Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's so nice to join you today. Thank you to JT and Jerry for having me. I'm very passionate about this topic. In the state of Louisiana, we have the Compete Louisiana program, which is a program to re-engage adults who have some college experience but no earned bachelor's degree. And my success coaches work with those students to figure out their personalized pathway back to higher ed. And so, as JT alluded to, it's really important to understand who your students are. So you definitely want to understand the data points surrounding them. In Compete Louisiana, we have students that typically have earned between 60 and 70 credit hours when they're ready to return. These are full-time workers. They have families, they have community responsibilities. And so understanding your demographic is going to be key to understanding how to help them move forward. But when we think about working with these adult students, in general, we can talk about 4 different types of barriers to re-entry that exist for these students. And the thing that's been pretty interesting for me as I've been doing this research and working with these students in this program is that we also see that any measures that you take to address the issues that exist for adults returning will also help your traditional students as well. And so the first type of barrier that I'd love to tell you about today is our understanding of dispositional barriers. So a dispositional barrier is a barrier within the student themselves. It's internal, and it has to do with their competence level and their ability to think about their self-efficacy. So typically with a stopped out student, they've had several experiences trying to return, and none of them have resulted in a bachelor's degree yet. And so there's this little seed of doubt that's in them saying, what's going to make this time different? And so if we as practitioners can know that and understand that and do what we can along the way to help bolster confidence for these students, then there's a better chance of us retaining the students this time, and also for those students feeling their belonging and fit with your institution. The second type of barrier that we typically see are situational barriers. And so situational barriers can be any kind of life event. So they're happy things, they're marriages and babies and new jobs, and they're really hard things like loss of job and deaths and perhaps illness. And so in those cases, there's not a whole lot that we can do at an institutional side to address those life circumstances from just happening to our students. But we can think through what processes and policies we have in place to work with students when life does become the issue. The third type of barrier is institutional barriers, which I know it sounds weird to say that I have a favorite type of barrier, but the reason I like institutional barriers is because it's within our control to change. And so institutional barriers are things that we in higher education unknowingly put into motion that makes it harder for a student to return. They might be things like not having a readmit GPA. So if you have dismissed a student because they are not academically performing and you tell them they need to sit out for a year and then they need to come back to you, well, chances are they may not have that 2.0 that you require for easy admission, which means you're going to have to give them a denial and send them through an appeals process. And so in that situation, I have to ask the question, and I ask the question to our institutions all the time, what can we do to eliminate the number of steps that a student has to do to return to us? Because we all agree that we want them back. The fourth barrier that we typically see is technological barriers. And so I'd be remiss if we didn't talk about that. I think we all learned a lot during the pandemic about who had access to technology, whether that was internet infrastructure or actually having the hardware that a student needs to be successful in an online course. Many of our adult students are returning in an online format. It's the most flexible and affordable way that they can finish their degree. And so we have to be thinking about what strategies we have deployed to help students with digital literacy, because we can't make assumptions about what they know or what they don't know. For several of the students returning through Compete Louisiana, we found that they've never had experience taking an online course before. And so to just throw them to the wind and hope that they succeed isn't necessarily what we're doing to set them up for success. So be thinking about those orientations, be thinking about the skill sets needed and identifying those at the beginning of class, and being willing to work with students to get them the resources that they need, even if that's something that you think maybe is common sense by this point.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Katie. And one of the things I'm hearing from you is your first two barriers are about compassion for your student, right? Understanding their circumstances. And then you have what can we as an institution do to help those students, and including their own professional development. And so it's a pretty complex system that you have here that you're trying to juggle. And I know from a state institution, community college, we often struggle with how do I juggle addressing all these different barriers. So when we don't have a lot of time and we don't have a lot of staff, where would you recommend we prioritize our time if we're just getting started with trying to do this re-enrollment process?
So that's a great question, Jerry. And for me, it always starts with relationship building. So if you can reestablish that relationship with that student and regain that student's trust and let them know you might not have all the answers up front, there may be problems in your process that you're working to address and you can't address that quickly. But what I tell my team all the time is that we're in the business of setting expectations. And it doesn't mean that there won't be difficulty, but it means that you have somebody that's going to stick with you and help you navigate that difficulty as you move forward.
Well, what I'm hearing too is your leadership in guiding your staff who the re-enrolled students touch in many different ways, right? On all the different services, communicating that message is so important. And it sounds like too, your favorite barriers, your institutional ones, these are things that you can really do to make things happen for those students.
Absolutely. I am very lucky to be one of many great leaders within our system who have their eye on the prize of student success and student engagement. And so I think that if we work together, which we'll talk about in a little bit, there's a lot more that we can accomplish than just working as a team of one.
All right, wonderful. And so with all these barriers, you have a pathway that you can guide people through what we need to keep in mind as a strategy. And we're looking forward to hearing about that. So next slide, Emily.
So as Jerry alluded to, I do have some principles that I think we can frame our work in that will help us keep student success and student access at the forefront of the work that we're doing. And so Earlier this summer, I was asked by my leadership team, like, is there a process? Is there a process that all institutions should be following to move students through quickly and efficiently and to keep them at the center of this process? And I thought long and hard, and I worked on a few models, but honestly, when it came down to it, if there was one quick and easy way to fix all of these problems, I certainly probably would not be the person who comes up with it. But we'd already know that. And so I think there is some strength and diversity of the way that we work with our students because you know your student group, you know how to engage them best. But there are some principles that we can think through about the processes, the policies, and the practice that we have at our institutions to make things a little more streamlined for students. So that first principle is a frictionless principle. So with ease. We talk about it a lot in online course design. So you do not want your students to have to click through 30 or 40 things to get to the resource or material that you want them to have. You also don't want your students guessing how to apply to your institution. So if you have lots of click-throughs, if there are multiple steps that could be consolidated to one or two, that's an opportunity to create less friction. Our second principle is transparent. So lots of times we in higher education, we talk to each other about enrollment and re-engagement, and we know all the jargon and we understand what we mean, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the outside community understands. And so when I talk about transparency, I'm talking about put all of the things that are required to be admitted into your institution up front in a checklist. Let a student know they're going to have to go and get those transcripts, even if it's a letter of non-attendance that's needed. Explain that up front so there are no surprises when they start moving through this process and run into one of these steps that may throw them off and may encourage them not to continue. The third principle is timeliness. So we live in a world of Amazon Prime, and I don't know about you guys, but if I can't get it within 24 to 48 hours, I don't know that I want it anymore. And our students are the same way. They're ready to come back to us. A lot of times adult students are making a gut decision. Something in their life made them turn their attention back to higher ed and made them think, I need to go back right now. Well, if we're not able to work with them when they're ready, then we're going to miss them. And so be thinking about what the time looks around your process is. What's your timeliness of communication? What's your timeliness of processing an application? And what does it look like once somebody's admitted to the time that they enroll? Think about those things. Time those things. Use automations. Like, we don't have to be robots. And finally, my last principle is you have to think inclusively. So as we mentioned, those institutional barriers exist. And they're the things that we did. We in higher education created those. And so as we step back and assess them, ask yourself, is this something reasonable that somebody who can't make it to campus and can't come see me between 8 and 5 or call me on a 12 o'clock lunch break, is this something they can do? When we talk to online educators about teaching online, we talk about doing virtual office hours and offering some options for evening and weekends, because that may be when your adult student can get to you. That's the kind of thoughtfulness that we can bring if we think inclusively about the way that we're serving our students.
Well, thank you. This has been really helpful again. And the two principles for me that stuck out, one is you're frictionless. And one of the things you said, both from the online learning experience, your course designers, and then you have your admissions processes. Often those folks don't talk to one another about things. And the important role that you play is how do you help the whole student experience be frictionless? And that often connects with the second point, transparency. You talked about the importance of bringing that compassion and helping that student say, I can do it, right, to help that disposition. Can you talk a little bit more about why that transparency principle is so important in helping your students overcome those barriers that they're going to face?
Absolutely. So I know that we've all likely been in a position previously where we've been playing a game, but we haven't known all the rules. And when you're in that position, you feel unsteady and unsure of yourself. And any opportunity that presents itself for you to exit may be the opportunity that you take. Whereas if you know what the rules are up front, so thinking about those student handbooks that we give to students, making sure that they understand that that's their resource guide, talking to students about the syllabus. We kind of chuckle about it in higher ed because what faculty doesn't always refer to the syllabus, but really helping students understand that that's the contract between you and your instructor. And if you have any questions, that's where you can go first to see if you need clarity, and then reach out to your instructor. It's thinking about the fact that you may have 3 to 5 admission processors, depending on the size of your institution, but hopefully you have thousands of students that want to be part of your institution. And so how are those 3 to 5 people going to give that personal experience to those oncoming students? They may not be able to, but if you tell your students what you need up front, and you have a chat bot, a Q&A, a number that they can call to get help if they need help, then you're at least shortening the curve of making sure that you have the customer service that you need to have to keep those students on board.
Great, great. Well, and JT, with all your 20 plus experience in the field on here and serving many types of institutions, are you seeing these principles for successful re-enrollment in other institutions, and what myFootpath can help bring those services to other institutions?
Yeah, for sure. And I was smiling as Katie, you were talking about some of these pieces here. We're big believers in transparency and really with the student and kind of around the process, particularly of enrollment. And I would say, kind of the best practice that we see is, you can't always get it done as fast as you'd like, but if you explain to the student that this is going to take time, usually they'll work with you on that time frame. And that communication of, well, even though I'd like this to take 2 days, it's actually going to take 10. If you just tell them that it's going to take 10 days, they'll say, oh, okay, fine, right? And so, but that little piece of communication can really build the confidence. It can build the sort of faith, if you will, in the process that it's working as intended, and really pull the student through it. So that's one of the things that we see. Why don't we go to the next slide and we could talk a little bit about the culture.
Culture, that sounds great.
Yeah, so it's not just the thought process that needs this to change, it's also changing the culture of higher ed. So for so long, we've been focused on serving our 18 to 22, 24-year-old students, and it's not that is something that we need to steer away from. They will always be the lifeblood, especially for our brick and mortar institutions. But man, we want lifelong learning. That's what we're in higher education for. We don't want you to come and get a degree and then go on with your life and never think about us again. We want you coming back to us. We want you to re-engage with us for graduate degrees and certificates. We want to hook you up with our industry partners. We really want to create this lifelong learning. And to do that, we have to shift our mindset to thinking about serving adults. And so I'm so lucky. I consider myself to be almost like the center spoke in a wheel as I've been working on this Compete LA project. I have an amazing success coach team. There are 5 individuals that take their jobs very seriously and are passionate about connecting students with the resources that will help them succeed. I have an amazing implementation team. So I have leads at every campus within our system that they lead the charge on their campus to make sure that Compete LA students are thought of and included when we're talking about these processes, policies, and practices. And then, of course, I have an amazing executive leadership team. So Compete LA was born out of this idea from Dr. Henderson, our CEO and president's head. He knew that we needed a way to re-engage with these adults, and he knew that we already had the resources on our campuses to do it. We just had to think differently about it. And so part of what we've been talking to our faculty and staff about is that this is an opportunity for us to actually create change. Like, you as an individual can create change just by shifting the way that you think about serving students. And those opportunities are going to bring our communities better economic growth and promise. We're going to hopefully be the place where industry wants to come because we're going to have the skilled workers that they need. And when you're educating adults, their first thought is not necessarily, how do I move out of this state now? It's, how do I use what I've learned to grow my family where they are? And finally, it's an opportunity to create a culture of collaboration across your campus. So many times, I think our student life cycle is siloed. You're in charge of admissions. You have the advising process. Academic affairs takes care of the classroom. Well, we're losing people in those gaps. Whereas if we're able to work together and think through these processes and communicate, say something when you see something, we'll be able to tackle this challenge, and we'll be able to do what I think higher education was always meant to do, which is create lifelong learners.
Well, that's wonderful, Katie. And I think the other aspect that's coming, and people might have heard about the enrollment cliff, the number of college-going students out of high school is going to drop, and our institutions have to serve the adult learner in order for us to keep those enrollment targets achieved for our states and for the economy. So your question of why should we bother, these are really important issues, and your leadership in really having a strategic plan that connects all the silos for the institution sounds really important for, to help facilitate that process. And JT, is that what also you're seeing too, an important role that myFootpath can help an institution do?
Yeah, the word that really resonated for me as you were talking about that, Katie, is the collaboration. And so one of the ways that we try to help clients facilitate that is create what we call a steering committee around re-engagement. And so this can really represent the different areas of the university at the leadership level to do a couple of things. One is to talk about it regularly and to take materials that you prepare for that steering committee and then distribute out to the teams in kind of a consistent way so that messaging is received, it's understood, they know what you're talking about, they're up to speed. But the other thing that it does is it plans for the inevitable change in higher education. As people go in and out of positions, they're on to the next thing, they're doing their next project, that's going to happen. So you might as well plan for it. And the steering committee structure will help to facilitate and create those collaborative moments throughout. And it doesn't have to be a lot of effort or time either, right? You can meet twice a year, but it's the kind of thing where it can really make a difference to take the issue and bring it out to the masses to kind of get everybody on the same page, and really fosters that collaboration.
Well, thank you. And I would just want to thank Katie for all the strategies that you've laid out. And, with the 4 principles or 5 principles I can remember, and then understanding the barriers really helps take a complex system and make them manageable. So thank you, Katie. And we're going to continue having Katie join, but now we're going to pass it over to JT to talk about his breadth of experience too, about bringing back the stop out students and the strategies that myFootpath can help you do too as well.
Thanks, Jerry. So as you go to the next slide, what you'll see here is this is just sort of a rough overview, right? So on the left, you've got roughly the student going in and out, right? They start their journey, something gets in the way. Very oversimplified, believe me. but what we do with our program and our work is really collaborate with universities to understand, well, where are students now? And that data analysis drives how do you talk to them? How do you stay in the conversation? Some of the barriers that Katie was talking about, the institutional barriers, may be relatively straightforward to overcome. But some of the barriers around the life events going on, it's more critical to just stay in the conversation. And when they make that decision to come back, you're there and you're ready for them. So that marketing kind of overlays to do that elegantly and without too much effort as well, right? And when they raise their hand, then you're ready. And that's really when we encourage, make a phone call and drive them and pull them through that process. So if you turn to the next slide, these are some of the barriers that we see, amongst institutions, right? So Katie, that was a great overview of kind of all the barriers that the students face. These are the ones we really see within the institution. And so we talked a lot about the enrollment process, and so many of these are really about how do you overcome them. And so a lot of our work with clients is to talk through, well, what are yours? Because they're going to be different in Louisiana than they may be in Arkansas, than they may be at other places. And so how do you do it and where do you focus? That's what our data and analysis will allow you to say, go here, right? So that's really the piece that we spent a lot of time and work to understand and drive. Jerry, I'll pass it back to you.
Great. And thank you, JT. And I think one of the things that I'm hearing too about this communication, both from you and Katie, is how do you get the student feeling that they belong at the institution, right? And that they can help manage it. And that belongingness is just as important for the new freshman coming in as the re-enrollment student. And one of the things, JT, I think the importance of data that you talk about to help you as an institution say, how do I communicate with that student? What do I need to say is so important. And that's often a challenge. I know before I retired, which I'm very grateful that I am right now, but before I retired, working in the Cal State Online and the Reconnect program, trying to get data from my institutional research that would be relevant for my planning was a real challenge. So is there things that myFootpath does that can help everyone kind of get started on the right path to bring the feet back into my institution? Oh, the Stop Out Insights Kit, that's great. I hope I set you up there because, and I know we're having fun on this stuff, but these are things that can really help someone who's got this task and trying to figure out how do I start on bringing back my students.
Yeah, like I couldn't agree more. It's the Insights Kit is one that we find when we talk with different universities about re-engagement, it can be overwhelming, right? So it's I've got this issue and this issue and this system doesn't work and I don't have this data or whatever, and it's like so what this kit attempts to do is to create order out of chaos, right? And so if you turn to the next slide, the key elements here that it focuses on is the first piece is just looking at, well, where are your students now? And if they're not, are they welcome back to the university, and how are they welcome back? So, one of the key pieces, Katie, you mentioned it when you talked about it. If they stopped out for academic reasons, well, what's the pathway back, right? If they have a balance, okay, maybe that's a different pathway. So it's really understanding where are they now and the quantities, right? So that then you can prioritize where you're going to get the biggest return. So that's part of what the kit really does. And with anything, as you go through it, and particularly as you think about some of those institutional barriers, when someone says to me, well, I just don't know how I can find the funding for something like this in a project, what I always advise them to do is make your case from a financial impact point of view. And so using these numbers, you can understand really, well, what size of students are we talking about? Are we talking about 10? Are we talking about 1,000, right? And that people will listen, right? People will listen as you understand really the size of the opportunity and how you focus it. But then, how do you do it, right? So what resources do you have? And so part of the kit that allows you that allows universities to sort of reflect internally to say, okay, can I run this initiative internally, or do I need help? Because we just don't have the bodies and the people and the systems that might be there today. And so that's what it's designed to do. And it's a pretty powerful piece of analysis. Pretty powerful piece of analysis. So let me just pause for a moment there. Comments, thoughts?
So, JT, I think that is spot on what institutions need to be doing as they're thinking about how to re-engage these students. So Compete LA, we thought we were super smart. We went to our 9 institution, we asked for the stop out data from our 9 institutions. We sorted it for people that had good 2.0 or above GPA and a high number of hours earned. And we thought they were going to be the low-hanging fruit that would just run back to us for this opportunity. If they were doing that well in the first place, they've done okay outside of the institution too. So in our experience, the students who came back to us first were those in the highest academic need.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. It's absolutely true. And so as we look at it as well, I mean, we see, and again, it's just where do you apply the effort, right? So if that's the pool and that's where you're coming back, then you want to come up with a policy, right, to catch them. And so that's the piece where sort of the rubber hits the road is, yeah, we found them, now what? Right? So that's where we try to drive it when we can.
Right. And I think the other thing that this is something that Katie mentioned too, that there isn't a one size fits all strategy for any campus. And I know in the Cal State system, we have a saying, and we have 23 campuses serving 500,000 students. And we say, if you've been to one Cal State, you've been to one Cal State, right? And so understanding the nature of your students and your programs really requires a kind of a strategy to help people think through it. And I think that's what's so important about this kind of insights kit, JT. It could be really helpful. And I'll ask the question, and how much does it cost for someone to use your insight kit to get started? Because
Sure.
we don't have a lot of money and we don't have a lot of staff.
Yeah, well, the data component of it is free. And so it's really looking at the size of the opportunity. As you break it down, that can depending on the school, the complexity of the project there can be costs there, but you can get started for nothing. And so it's a great piece to take a real view of what this population might be, and oftentimes it gets you excited about the potential of what it could be.
Yeah, and I want to emphasize, and Katie, you can comment too about this experience. When you're given this assignment by an executive, they think it's going to be a simple problem. Oh, just bring our students back, but having data about the scope of the opportunity that here helps you kind of come back with a plan that says, I need more time, I need more funding, we need to coordinate staff, we need a committee, JT, that you talked about. So you can come back to your executives with a project plan that is going to be more realistic in solving the challenges that you're facing as an institution. And I don't know, Katie, do you find that too, as what they think it's a simple issue and it's a lot harder than they think?
I was very fortunate. We knew that this was going to be quite an undertaking when we got started. And so we're big fans of not waiting till we have everything perfect. We like to fly the plane and build the plane at the same time. But even in that, it's become an opportunity where it's critical that we have the collaboration piece, because there is no way that myself sitting in a government building in Baton Rouge, our state capital, is going to understand all of the needs that exist for all of the different students that our 9 institutions are serving. And so that critical piece of having that implementation team, or as JT referred to, that leadership team, who will help you not only identify opportunities to grow and improve, but also who manage the people and set the priorities for their teams to work on. that's a huge part of this too. And so I hope that you are in as wonderful a place as I am, in that you have the ability to think and really research and really partner and to make some mistakes, because, you know, mistakes give us lots of good lessons. But what is being offered through your Insights kit can absolutely shorten that learning curve.
Definitely.
Well,
Why don't we go to the
thank
next
you.
slide and we'll talk about the next webinar, and then we'll take a few questions.
There we go. And so folks, we've completed the second one, and be ready for the third one. Innovate, inspire, and succeed, some trailblazing strategies for enrollment growth. Again, we're going to be continued to focus on the re-enrollment, the adult learner, and what we can do there. It's October 3rd, 3 p.m. Eastern time, and we hope you can join us there. And what we'd like to do now is just open up for questions. And Emily, if you want to remind people about how they can ask their questions.
Yep. Okay. So we have some questions that came in. If you have more questions that you want to ask, you can type them into the question bar and press submit, and we'll see them come up on the screen here. So I have a first question from the audience. We see that one of the institutional barriers that you mentioned was a lack of funding to work on re-enrollment of stop-outs. How do you get internal budget dollars allocated to this type of initiative?
Okay, you're probably fighting that fight. You want to talk about it?
Sure. Actually, I'm just building on what JT already shared. It's figuring out what revenue could be projected if you were able to shift and serve even a portion of the stopped out students that you want to serve. And so for us, it was thinking through the modalities that are offered. So clearly our online programs are more attractive than our on-ground programs, just because of the flexibility that adults need, but also the structuring. So thinking about your courses in a semester or bi-term sort of stance. So when I was at the University of Louisiana Monroe, we knew that we had a problem we needed to address. One of the things that we realized is that by switching to 8-week terms, we allowed adult students to take a full-time course load. Well, full-time course load versus part-time course load is much better economically for your institution as far as making the things go. So it's honestly establishing what is, what could be, and then making the argument and showing strength in your research and your leadership, and also student experience. If you can get some student feedback in there, that goes a long way in pushing the needle as well.
Yeah, we have a saying, we say revenue cures a lot of problems. So that's usually our focus, right? Is how do we help the institution drive the revenue to get the funding to support the dollars?
Yeah, and I'll jump in here. Often when there's a new project, someone says, oh, this is an added expense. Where are we going to get the money, right? Now, what I always try to, and what JT and Katie have talked about, is how do you change the term from an expense to an investment by saying, if we invest in this, we will get a return on that investment of more revenue coming in that will cover this expense, this operational cost. And so that's a way, and then it also helps address lots of other strategic issues around enrollment. But the revenue coming in from your increased enrollment can then become a sustainable support for your program. So getting that, the person who's got the money to shift their mindset from expense to investment is an important thing. And that's where I think the Insight Kit can give you some of that initial data to help you say, what can I look at, what this return on this investment would be.
Okay, I got another question here. Looking at the situational barriers that students face, like new jobs, new babies, or illness, how do you monitor and track these? And when do you know when it's time to check in with a potential student?
So for us, we have it cadenced. Our coaches check in with our students on a 6 to 8 week basis, especially for those enrolled students. We have a little bit heavier of a touch at the start of their experience. So we're going to try and check in with them in week 3 and week 9 in their first semester back, just to make sure that they're reacclimating. And so I would say that some of that can be done through automation. Again, it just needs to be a personalized touch. It doesn't necessarily have to be a phone call. Text messaging has been a great resource for us. So the ability for a success coach just to send a quick text to the student saying, hey, is everything going okay? Are you starting back all right? That's been pretty huge as well. So establishing those communication patterns, understanding what it is that you want, and then working directly with the student. 9 times out of 10, we may not know what's happening with the student. They may ghost us. It happens. But when that is the case, we try to put our students into a communication plan so that they get drip communications to let them know that when they're ready to come back, we're ready to serve them. That's something that I think we could implement at the institutional level for stopped out students so that they know that just because you've wandered away doesn't mean that we don't want you to wander back.
Yeah, and from our chair, we sort of organize them by barrier. So again, same cadence. And then what we find is, some barriers you can solve in a week, and other barriers, particularly some of the situational barriers, take a longer time. So, if someone is getting married or has to, caregiving for a family member, that can take time to sort of sort through. And so those tend to be on like a 6-month cadence for us. But it's very much sort of organized by barrier for how the cadence, initiates, I guess.
Well, and JT, I think you made a great point. One of the things that we track in our system are step outs. So we define a step out as a student who intends to be gone from the institution for a period of time, but no longer than a year. And so at that point, we're terming them stop outs if they plan to be gone for a year. But what's been very interesting as we track that is watching people step in and step out and step in and step out. Because again, they know how to do that. They know their own limits at this point. They're not looking to take on any more responsibility or any more debt that they can handle at one point in time. So making that transition from stepping in to stepping out is going to be key in helping them finish without sending them through the application process over and over and over again.
And what I'm hearing from both of you is that our understanding and the data profile of our student is more than their ID number, their major, and their number of units and their GPA. It's who's the human being behind there, right? And so how do our student systems, our data systems, how to capture these things? Because you need to know what their behaviors are if you're going to provide a service for them.
You got it,
And
Jerry.
I just wanted to mention that we're at the scheduled end time. So if you have any meetings to get to, feel free to leave. We're going to stay and answer a few more questions, and we'll send everyone a recorded version so you can still listen to the answers later if you need to leave now. So our next question that we have here is, you talked about changing the culture around re-engaging students. What were some of the barriers you had to overcome with university staff?
So I think a lot of it was transparency on our end. So when Compete LA was started, it was going to be specifically for adult students. There were going to be a portfolio of academic programs included. And so only the at least academic side that had a portfolio program was kind of included in the introductory to what Compete LA even was. Since that time, we've opened our program up to be any undergraduate program offered by any of our 9 institutions. And so I've been systematically doing campus visits and trying to meet with stakeholders to help them understand how this can help the institution overall, but how their academic program could be included. I'm very fortunate in that our implementation teams aren't just leadership. It's people who are boots on the ground working with these students every day, and their insights are invaluable. So if you do take the approach of creating a team, I would strongly suggest and encourage that you have some sort of component for the people that are actually working with the students, because again, they're the ones that are going to be your first line of defense and here when something isn't going the way that it should be, but they're not necessarily the decision makers who can make the change to change it to improve.
Yeah, and I would echo that. That's such a critical component, right? Is that who's talking to the student, right? Who's interacting with the student? What are they telling you? And I think that that feedback can, can be so critical in overcoming some of the institutional barriers you face.
Yeah, and I'll jump in with the institutional barriers. Often that sometimes can, let's say, the silos can pit units against one another, but focusing in on what's the broader institutional goals. How do we help all of our institutions? And we have to collaborate together rather than compete for funding. And that's making that argument to say together we can do much more and achieve those strategic goals. And so I'm with you there, both of you. It's really important to help that collaboration occur.
All right, I have one more question here for you all. What systems do you use to track student barriers? It doesn't seem to easily fit into our current CRM structure, so how do you approach the tracking problem?
So interesting question. We had the same sort of structural issue when we started Compete LA, and we actually ended up developing our own CRM. And so we worked with a local academic programming company, and we've actually put that CRM on the market. So please reach out to me if you have any interest. We feel like it's a very intuitive system. We have over 90 users using the system from across our 9 institutions, and no one has struggled to figure out where to put information. The biggest component of what we did, and the thing that I think is helping us the most, is that we have a section for notes. So if it's not on the contact record, if somebody tells you that they have that life situation coming up, any of the users that have access to that student's contact record can share that information with the team that's working with that student. And so we do that to try and improve transparency. But you're right, we found that we had to go and build our own to really have something that fit what we needed it to.
Yeah, and what we find with different clients is usually we're, the technology they have is what we have, right? So we sort of put it together. But what I think we've seen is, using some things like even a case in Salesforce, which is not ideal to track many of these things. It can be with some structure. The other piece that we try to encourage among clients is taking notes in a structured manner. So we have a 1, 2, 3, 4 system that gets to, what did you encounter, and essentially drives to the next action. So that if anybody picks up that record, right, however they get to it, whether it's in Salesforce or in a different system, that they know, well, this is what's going on. Right, and this is, and more importantly, this is what I need to do. So, which can be lost sometimes. So that's sort of our focus as we drive it.
Absolutely. I would also say that anything you can do to get that additional demographic information, which you collect anyways from these students when they come on in, can help you with that. If you know that students are at a retirement age, then you can expect that some of them may be retiring from their careers and looking to start new. If you know that your students are military, that is a whole different set of issues that come with that. But there are ways that you've already thought, you already likely have a Veterans Affairs office on your campus. Put those people on your team and help get that direct outreach out there. For us, it's a holistic approach. We're thinking of this thoughtfully, and we, again, want these students to not only come back to us, but to come back to us and succeed this time. And so some of it may be having to think outside the box of what you've typically done to serve your students.
Well, thank you both, Katie and JT, and everyone. There's contact information for both JT and Katie here. They bring tremendous expertise. I know I've learned a lot in this session, and I hope you did too. And don't forget, we're going to have the third webinar in this series, and there's recordings available. If you missed the first one, that's available too. So thank you again, and have a great rest of the week.
Thanks, everybody.